I've lived in New York City for 35 years, and one of the few things I've never done is march in the Greenwich Village Halloween Parade. This past October, a doctor friend of ours who was helping to write the health policy for the parade was able to make that dream come true. I dressed as a seasick cowboy with a purple complexion, and Katie dressed as a jealous cowgirl with a green face. It looked totally stupid. We looked like a couple of sunburnt grifters. But no matter, we started at Canal Street on Halloween night, and we marched up 7th Avenue through the village in front of thousands of screaming spectators. It was a blast. Then, at around Bleecker Street in the middle of Greenwich Village, I had a revelation. Every morning when I leave my apartment, I'm one of the village people. If I feel a little wild, I'm the cowboy. When I need to be a leader, I'm the Native American chief. When I need to be decisive and orderly, I'm the police officer. When I'm making things, I'm the construction worker. And when it's time to just straighten shit out, I'm the army dude. My point is that I am never the same person in the studio today that I was yesterday. Everything we go through makes itself apparent in our paintings at the appropriate time. The skill is knowing when to get the heck out of the way and just let stuff happen. An artist is both author and forger. Every new brushstroke obliterates the previous one and casts doubt on the concept of originality, because I'm stealing from myself. There is no such thing as creativity. There are only decisions. As the late Wayne Thiebaud wrote, "Wise decisions are more impressive than smart choices." Wisdom takes time. You have to be patient. That last whack on your skull might solve the painting, but it wasn't really that last whack. It was the thousands and thousands of whacks that came before it. When you're starting out, don't do what you think people will like, because chances are there's already someone doing it better. Do what you think people will hate, because then you'll be all alone. If you don't like alligators, then for God's sakes, paint alligators. If you like Black Sabbath, then don't start a heavy metal band that wears crucifixes and patchouli. They had it covered. Find a place in art where you don't see what you want to see, and stay there. A painting is a sped-up version of an entire life, but it must be your life, with a beginning, middle, and end. To use a contemporary reference, each painting that leaves my studio is a Rolodex of my experience. Every place I've been and every person I've met along the way. I paint because I haven't been enough places or met enough people. The true magic of painting is that it is the only art form that I know of that bears all of the tattletale evidence of its own creation. Unlike a film, poem, or dance in which the artist edits and modifies before we experience it, a painting is a record of the thoughts and emotions of the artist put into physical form. Whether you see the kernel of underpainting peeking through, the ghosts of the initial drawing, or webs of drips meandering down to the bottom of the canvas, you are staring back in time. My kids used to ask me when we would have time travel. I tell them we already do. You and I are culture's last folk artists because we make things by hand. A painting is the consequence of one person's activity. If you have a social message, then choose a social medium. Use the internet, make a film, write a blog, take photographs. But if you want to expose your heart to one other human being, then pick up a brush. Painting is like peeing in a swimming pool. You only affect a small vicinity. In other words, don't force painting to do too many things. Let it do what it does best, which is to kneel down beside someone and look directly into their eyes. Although a painting can educate, memorialize, provoke, and confront, it cannot change the world. However, it can alter one person's world by filling his or her remaining moments of time with supreme quality. If you can reach just one person, then you've made the earth a better place. I think that's a beautiful way to live. Oil paint is crushed rock mixed with liquefied fat and smeared on cloth. There is no such thing as light in painting, only the inference of it. A primary way in which we suggest luminosity is through the careful calibration of warm and cool colors. You can't suggest warm unless you place it near cool. A cool color can't sing unless it's juxtaposed with warm. It's never about a single color, but relationships of colors. Henri Matisse wrote, "I don't paint things, I only paint the difference between things." My palettes are divided according to temperature. Warm hues like burnt sienna, burnt umber, cadmium green, cadmium orange, cadmium red, yellow, ochre, Indian throne blue, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and sap green. Cooler colors might include alizarin crimson, lemon yellow, cerulean blue, cobalt green, dioxazine purple, Payne's gray, magenta, phthalo green, one of my favorites, viridian green, and emerald green. Although I never have a plan in a painting, I do usually have a temperature mood in mind. For example, if I feel like making a cool painting, then I will underpaint with warm tones like burnt sienna mixed with a bit of orange. This makes colder colors like lavender or mint green pop when placed on top, leaving a thin border of the warm peeking out from underneath. If I want to make a painting that radiates heat, then I might underpaint with a cooler temperature like pale violet or emerald green. A biscuit of cadmium red deep plopped on top of that will positively levitate. Walter Sickert, one of my favorite painters, underpainted in two colors, a warm Venetian red and a cool pale blue, for the lights and shadows respectively. Try to train yourself to see the world as shapes and colors. I don't see people, cars, and buildings, I see shapes and colors. When you see everything around you as shapes and colors, it's easier to paint shapes and colors. It also makes it easier to get through boring dinner parties. Painters will often pair warm and cool in the same object. For example, Alfred Maurer paints a warm tree that casts a cool shadow. Bob Thompson seats a cool blue female figure playing guitar in front of a warm orange middle ground. The result is a fully elastic sense of space, as if you can imagine the space behind the women, even though we don't see it. Google Bob Thompson to see the masterful use of temperatures. My old friend, the painter Will Barnett, once told me that the last thing he does before going to bed is drink a glass of ice-cold water. I do the same thing. I stand in front of the fridge, close my eyes, and feel lassos of cold tumbling down my warm throat to remind me that I've lived another day as a dirtball painter. I read that quote a long time ago, and it took me many decades to figure out what it meant. Before you put a brush to canvas, you must know where to fall down. In other words, you have to figure out how to be the most like yourself. Artists are people who are the most like themselves. And it usually starts in childhood. When I was a kid growing up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, my name on the streets was Sea Monkey. because I like to be in or near the water. Very recently, I was checking through security at the airport, and the TSA agent looked at my license and then asked me, "Tell me your street name." I said, "Sea Monkey." This is me at age 17, playing on the local TV channel in Myrtle Beach at a charity telethon with my rock band, Impulse. The reason that I didn't become a drummer is because you have to rely too much on other people. Punctuality is important to me. As my dad used to say, to be early is to be on time is to be late is unforgivable. Myrtle Beach in the late 70s, early 80s offered virtually no exposure to the fine arts. The first artist I ever met was me. I was a happy kid, but something felt off, as if someone else's teeth were in my mouth. I had a loving family, but I longed for that other family. You know what I'm talking about. We each get two families, the one we're born into and the one we make along the way. It wasn't until 1983, when I got to the College of Charleston, that I found my people. Towering figures like William Halsey and Michael Tyzak, my other fathers. And in that place at that time, just like the moon, I fell down and became the most like myself. The subsequent 40 plus years have been practicing handling paint better. I knew what good looked like a long time ago. I just never had the skills to make it. Whenever you hear critics and teachers say, grow and evolve, run for the exits, those are art school bullshit words. It takes time to get good at stuff. The key is to not pile on too much stuff. If you're constantly fixated on moving forward, then you're going to pirouette right past the things that made you want to be a painter in the first place. The obvious things that are right in front of you. Imagine a long hallway, and on each side are closed doors. And at the end of the hallway is a single closed door. We're conditioned to believe that we have to get all the way down at the end and open that door to find success. I'll bet you a cold beer that the truth lies in one of the first couple of doors that you passed a long time ago. Those are where the things that matter, the things that made you want to be a painter in the first place, lie. A painter's life is as much about going backwards as it is about moving forward. If something seems too difficult, quit. No one talks about that. Painting should come easily. Without quitters, stampedes would never end. It takes one buffalo to say, "Yo, I'm exhausted. My knees hurt. Let's get a pizza." Painting should be as easy as getting out of bed. No one says, "Look how good I am at getting out of bed." You just swing your legs over, plant your feet on the floor, and we're done. The intention and the action are the same thing. I once heard a sportscaster recount how he saw Serena Williams eviscerate her opponent with her first serve over and over again. And after the match, after Serena Williams was victorious, he was walking back to his car and he noticed a lone figure on a practice court under the lights. He walked a little closer and saw that it was Serena Williams. What was she doing? Practicing her first serve. Work on your strengths, not your weaknesses. Find a place to fall down and stay there. The rest is just practice. My paintings are framed in beautiful walnut frames, which have a 1/4-inch reveal that is set back, giving the image the feeling of floating inside the frame. This works best for my paintings because of their physicality. I don't want any part of the frame resting up against the image. I like that little bit of space. Plus, it covers the messy sides of the canvas. Some collectors like those rough, fingerprint, drippy sides of the canvas, but I find that most of them don't. Presentation is very important. I use Gerlach frames in Brooklyn, founded by my old pal Russ Gerlach, who's an excellent painter in his own right and is one of the best framers in the business. Many of the frames you see in New York's major museums were crafted by Russ. That's him on the left. But frames can get pricey. Two less expensive ways to clean up the sides of your painting are to apply blue painter's tape on all four sides before you start. Then, when you're finished, pull the tape off to reveal a crisp white edge. Another option is to mix yellow ochre and raw umber acrylic paint in a cup and then carefully paint the sides. You can tint with white if you prefer a paler hue. When it dries, it appears like natural linen and covers up a lot of sins. When painters talk about balance, they are referring to the even placement of elements in a pictorial context. For example, in Perugino, even though the two sides do not exactly mirror one another, it still suggests stability and calm because of the careful arrangement of pictorial elements in each side. Let's divide balance into three categories: symmetrical balance, radial symmetry, and asymmetry. Symmetrical balance is the mirroring of information in two halves. For example, in a Greek temple, each side is a mirror of the other. This suggests authority and steady power. Often on my subway ride home from my studio every night, I look at photographs of my paintings on my iPhone, which allows me to shrink them down and then isolate one half from the other to check elements of balance and imbalance. An easy way to see the balance and imbalance in your composition is to think of soap bubbles. For instance, in this Giorgio Morandi from 1946, I'm going to put one bubble around the three vessels on the right and always include their shadows. And then on the left, the two items plus their shadow. And you can clearly see there's an imbalance between left and right, which gives the composition a feeling of animation and hierarchy, because one bubble dominates the other. In this new painting of mine, I'm going to draw a soap bubble around this cluster of tree and branch-like forms on the left. And then to balance it, I'm going to draw a much smaller soap bubble around this high-intensity area on the right. And you can see that one bubble on the left is much larger than the one on the right. And this gives the impression of being slingshot from very foreground to very distant background, with nothing in between. The feeling of standing here, looking there. Radial symmetry is the repeating of information around a center point. Think of a daisy seen head-on. It looks balanced and predictable as you move outward from the center. You see this in a lot of sacred imagery, like mandalas, which exude a sense of order and hierarchy. Asymmetry is when two sides are different from one another, yet they still occupy a similar visual weight. For example, in this classical Greek figure, although it does not stand in a symmetrical pose, it still feels balanced and right. In figurative art, this is referred to as contrapposto, which literally means counterpoise. This technique gives the human figure a sense of movement or the promise of movement. My favorite asymmetrical composition is Gustave Courbet's Wrestlers from 1853. If you divide the composition vertically, you can see that the two halves do not mirror each other, yet their writhing, torqued bodies feel oddly balanced and whole. Note how Courbet pinches the composition at their waists, like pinching a water balloon at the center. The result gives the wrestlers power and energy that seems to draw from the outer rectangle of the canvas. In other words, the object, the canvas itself, and the subject, the wrestlers, form a singularity that seems to draw energy from the sum of the two parts. As you're painting, think of a belly button. Is it an innie or an outie? Is the energy of your painting pushing outward or pulling inward? A good example of an innie might be George Bellows' Stag at Sharkey's. A good example of an outie might be Henri Matisse's Dancers. There is no correct answer here. It's just helpful to sometimes pair the things that you're doing in your painting to your physical body. That way, you'll always have it with you. As I paint, I'm always aware of how my forms relate to the four sides of the canvas. Do they echo the sides, or do they oppose them? If done with care, this technique can make the image feel as if it's inhaling and exhaling. Like all living things, it must be fed or die. My teacher used to say that a painting is like a circus tent, a bunch of wooden poles supporting a canvas surface. So there's always the feeling of its inevitable dismantlement. Picasso liked to use asymmetry to expose the internal life of his figures. For example, in Blind Man's Meal, 1903, he uses sharp right angles that echo the lower right corner of the stretcher to gently pull our gaze from the real world, which we occupy, into the psychological world of the blind man. The sharp angles of his arms are contrasted by the sloping curve of his posture. Picasso intensifies the man's blindness by emphasizing the other senses, such as sound. Notice his ear is the lightest value and is clearly drawn. Touch. His fingers gently rest on the cool, hard vase. And smell. The freshly baked bread. The subject and the object are the same thing. Let's compare two figurative painters. Jacques-Louis David's more precise and linear touch emphasizes the intellect over the senses, while Franz Hall's loose brushwork underscores the sensual and feels more spontaneous rather than contemplative. In other words, there is no gap between what they paint and how they paint it. All of the content sits on the tip of the brush because there isn't room there for anything else. The touch of the hand is a record of the mental state of both the painter and the figure being painted. But a painting is like wind chimes, which serve no purpose without wind. The painting can't come alive unless we graft our vitality onto the painted surface. In that moment, we join nervous systems with the painter and together manufacture a third thing. Art is that third thing. This drawing by Philip Guston achieves a similar asymmetrical power through abstraction. His mastery of arranging forms in space continues to feed me with ideas. There is no such thing as empty space in a two-dimensional image. If you see only the figures in space, then you're missing half of the drawing. The space between them and beside them is as vital as the figures themselves. The entire plane must be a cohesive whole. Every mark you make changes the entire battlefield. That's why it's important to step back every 45 seconds, put the brush down, clasp your hands behind your ass, and look at the painting.